She has been leeching off this family for years, my brother said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the conference room like he was delivering a verdict. She contributes nothing. She builds nothing. And frankly, she has no place at this table. I didn't say a word. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table with my hands folded in front of me, my expression completely neutral. 12 people were in that room. Board members, attorneys, financial advisors, and every single one of them was watching me, waiting for me to flinch. My brother was standing at the head of the table in a charcoal suit he'd bought with money that was never really his, pointing at a slide deck like he was presenting to shareholders, which, technically, he was. He just didn't know which shareholder mattered most. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 31 years old, and until 48 hours before that meeting, almost no one in my family knew what I actually did for a living. Let me back up. I grew up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, the youngest of 3 children. My sister Diane is 4 years older than me, and has always been sweet, conflict-averse. The kind of person who apologizes when someone bumps into her. My brother Derek is 6 years older than me, and has always been the opposite. Loud, certain of himself. The kind of person who walks into a room and immediately starts rearranging the furniture without asking if anyone lives there. Our father built a regional construction company from nothing. Whitfield Development. Commercial properties, light industrial, some residential, nothing flashy, but solid. By the time I was in high school, it employed around 200 people across 3 counties. Dad was proud of it in the way that men of his generation are proud of things they built with their hands quietly, fiercely, and with the unspoken assumption that it would outlast him. He always assumed Derek would run it someday. Derek assumed the same thing. Loudly, constantly, from approximately the age of 14. I was not supposed to be part of the equation. When I was 17, I told my father I wanted to study finance. Not construction management, not business administration with an eye toward Whitfield Development finance. Investments, capital markets, the mechanics of how money actually moves. He looked at me the way he always did when I said something he didn't quite understand, like I was a faucet making a noise he hadn't heard before. "That's fine, Claire," he said. "You'll figure out what you want to do eventually." What he meant was, that's not really relevant to the plan. I figured that out when I was 22, the summer before my last year of graduate school. I came home for my cousin's wedding and overheard my father and my brother in the study. Derek was talking about his vision for the company expanding into urban development, taking on bigger projects, repositioning the brand. My father was nodding. Then Derek said, "We should start transitioning now. Get me on the documents. Get me in front of the banks." And my father said, "I agree. You've earned it." I stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then I went back to the kitchen and helped my mother arrange appetizers for the rehearsal dinner. I did not tell anyone what I'd heard. I did not make a scene. I did not even bring it up over the following months when my father started formally transferring operational control to Derek, step by step, signature by signature. What I did instead was go back to school, finish my degree, take a job at a private equity firm in Chicago that nobody in my family had heard of, and work harder than I had ever worked in my life. 4 years later, I was a junior partner. 3 years after that, I was managing a portfolio worth just over $200 million, and nobody in my family knew. Not because I was hiding it. Exactly. I mentioned it. I told my mother once that I'd been promoted, and that the work was going well. She said, "That's wonderful, honey. Derek just closed a deal on a new warehouse complex." I sent my father an article once a trade publication had mentioned me in a piece about emerging voices in private equity. He texted back a thumbs up emoji. They weren't interested, so I stopped explaining. This is important, because what happened next makes a lot more sense once you understand that my family had spent a decade and a half constructing a very specific story about who I was. In that story, I was the youngest, the wanderer, the one who left for the big city and never quite figured it out. Derek was the one who stayed. Derek was the one who mattered. I was the footnote. They were so convinced of this story that they stopped paying attention to what I was actually doing. That was their mistake. 18 months ago, I got a phone call from my father's attorney. My father had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. He wasn't incapacitated, he could still manage his daily life, but he was stepping back from the business entirely and wanted to formalize the succession. Derek was to become CEO and majority stakeholder. There would be a formal board meeting to ratify the transfer. My father called me separately, the night before he called Derek. He sounded tired, and smaller somehow, like the disease had already started compressing him. "I want to make sure you're taken care of, Claire," he said. "I'm leaving you some money in the estate, and you'll still be a minority shareholder. I gave you 5% years ago, remember, when you graduated?" "I remember," I said. Derek is going to need help getting the new projects off the ground. There may be a capital shortfall in the first 18 months. I told him the family would support it. What does that mean exactly? It means if Derek comes to you asking for an investment, I hope you'll consider it. I told my father I loved him. I told him I would think about it. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment on the 42nd floor overlooking Lake Michigan, and I thought about it for a long time. Derek called me 6 weeks later. He was charm itself on the phone, warm, collegial, calling me Clary the way he used to when we were kids, and he wanted something. He had a project. A large mixed-use development in the Columbus metro area. Retail on the ground floor, office space above, residential on the top 4 floors. He needed a capital partner, someone who could bring in $8 million as a silent equity investor. He had other investors lined up, but there was a gap. I thought of you first, he said. Family. I asked him to send me the prospectus. He did. I read every page. I had 3 of my colleagues review it as well. The project itself was sound, the location was good, the contracts were reasonable, the timeline was aggressive but achievable. Derek was many things, but he wasn't incompetent at construction. The financials, though, had a problem. A quiet one, buried in the footnotes. Derek had already borrowed against the projected equity of the project to fund his personal acquisition of a stake in a separate hospitality venture, a boutique hotel group that, based on my research, was hemorrhaging cash. He needed my $8 million not just to fill the gap in the development project. He needed it to keep the hotel investment from dragging him under before the development project could generate returns. He was borrowing from one hand to pay the other, and he was doing it with money he wanted from me. I thought about saying no. I genuinely considered it. I could have just declined, wished him well, gone back to my life in Chicago. That would have been the clean choice. But I thought about that night at the wedding, standing in the hallway. I thought about the thumbs up emoji. I thought about 25 years of being the footnote. I called my attorney instead. What happened over the next 4 months happened very quietly. I invested the $8 million. Derek was delighted. He called me a real partner and part of the team now and sent me a bottle of wine. What he did not read carefully enough, or possibly did not read at all, was the investment agreement my attorney drafted. It was 43 pages long. It contained, among other things, standard provisions for a preferred equity investor, board observation rights, anti-dilution protection, a right of first refusal on any subsequent equity offering, and a conversion clause that allowed my preferred equity to convert to common shares under specific conditions. One of those conditions was a material breach of the representations and warranties Derek had made in the agreement. One of those representations was that there were no undisclosed encumbrances on the project's projected equity. There was, of course, an undisclosed encumbrance. The hotel venture, the one he'd already borrowed against. My attorney found the documentation 4 months after I signed. It had been there the whole time, filed with the county, publicly accessible, simply never mentioned to me. When the conversion clause triggered, my $8 million of preferred equity converted to common shares at the original valuation, 43% of Whitfield Development's new mixed-use subsidiary, added to the 5% I already held in the parent company, restructured through a holding entity my attorney set up. I became very legally the single largest individual shareholder in the entire Whitfield development enterprise. Derek owned 38%. My father retained 20%. Diane had 7%. Various minority investors held the rest. I told no one. I went back to Chicago. I continued managing my portfolio. I sent my mother a birthday card. I waited. Derek figured it out 3 weeks before the board meeting. He didn't call me first. He called his attorney. His attorney apparently told him something to the effect that the situation was complicated but manageable. Then Derek called our father. I don't know exactly what he said, because I wasn't there, but I know what my father said to me afterward, because my father called me that same evening, and his voice had changed. It was harder, formal in a way it had never been with me. Derek tells me you manipulated the investment agreement, my father said. I invested $8 million, I said. The agreement is the agreement. He said you took advantage of him. He borrowed against the project equity without disclosing it to me. That's a breach of the representations he made. The conversion clause is standard. There was a long pause. Claire, I need you to understand that this company is Derek's legacy. It's what I built for him. I let that sentence sit between us for a moment. You built it, I said. Not for him. You built it. He didn't have an answer for that. The board meeting was called for a Tuesday morning. Ostensibly, it was still a routine governance meeting, ratification of the new organizational structure, introduction of the capital partners for the development project. But everyone in that room knew what it was actually about. Derek had retained outside counsel. A firm from Columbus, 2 attorneys I didn't recognize, who arrived 12 minutes late and set up on the right side of the table with the organized urgency of people who had been briefed on the flight over. My father sat at Derek's left. Diane sat next to my father, pale and quiet, picking at the edge of her notepad. My attorney, a woman named Susan Park, who I had worked with for 6 years, and who had the affect of someone who finds legal combat genuinely restful, sat next to me. I had a glass of water. I had a yellow legal pad. I did not open my laptop. Derek opened the meeting. He stood up, which wasn't necessary. The room wasn't that large, but Derek has always used space as a form of argument. He thanked everyone for coming. He said there were some structural matters to address before the normal agenda. He pulled up a slide. The slide showed a simplified cap table. It had been adjusted. In Derek's version, my 43% conversion had been reclassified as disputed equity, with a footnote about pending litigation. There was no pending litigation. He had filed nothing. This was theater. My sister, Derek said, and he said the word like it cost him something, has exploited a family investment to stage what I can only describe as a hostile maneuver against this company. Against our father's legacy. Against everything this family has worked for. He paused. He was very good at pauses. I want to be clear. We are not here to attack Claire. We're here because this company needs clarity about its leadership, and clarity requires that we address the situation directly. He kept going. He talked about my investment agreement, and how it was structured in a way that was designed to entrap rather than to support. He talked about the conversion clause, and used the word predatory twice. He talked about what he called my pattern of detachment from the family and the company, how I had spent 15 years on the outside, and had never shown any real commitment to what Whitfield development was supposed to be. She doesn't know this business, Derek said. She doesn't know our people, our clients, our culture. She has never broken ground on a single project. She has never sat across from a contractor and negotiated a materials deal. She has never been here. He looked at me. And now she wants to walk in and take control of something she had nothing to do with building. Everyone in the room was looking at me. I took a sip of water. Derek's outside counsel, the one on the left, leaned over and said something to him quietly. Derek nodded. We are asking Claire to voluntarily relinquish the converted shares in exchange for a buyout at a fair valuation. We think that's a reasonable resolution. We think that's the kind of thing a person who actually cares about this family would agree to. He sat down. One of the independent board members, a man named Gerald Tran, who had been on the Whitfield board for 9 years and who had, I knew, done his homework before this meeting, cleared his throat. He looked at Derek. Then he looked at me. Miss Whitfield, he said carefully, would you like to respond? I looked at Susan. She opened her folder and slid 3 sets of documents across the table, one to Gerald, one to my father's position, one to Derek's outside counsel. I'd like to start with the cap table, I said. The one on the slide is inaccurate. The one in front of you is correct, as filed with the state of Ohio as of 31 days ago. Derek's outside counsel picked up the document. I watched his face change. The conversion was valid, I said. It was triggered by a documented breach of the representations in the investment agreement, specifically the undisclosed borrowing against the project's projected equity, which my attorney identified through public records. I have the filing dates. I have the loan documentation. I have the timeline. If Derek believed the conversion clause was unenforceable, his opportunity to challenge it was in the 30 days following the trigger event. That window closed 18 days ago. I let that land. So there is no dispute, I said. There is no pending litigation, because none has been filed. The cap table on that slide is a fiction. Derek it, Claire. I'm not finished, I said. The room went very quiet. Derek's outside counsel was reading the documents. The one on the right had already taken out his phone under the table, which meant he was doing something he didn't want the room to see, which meant he was checking something he hadn't expected to need to check. I want to address what my brother said about my involvement in this company, I continued. He's right that I've never broken ground on a project. He's right that I've never negotiated a materials contract. Those aren't my skills, and they were never supposed to be. But I'd like the board to understand something about the $8 million I invested. I turned to Gerald. That capital closed the gap that was keeping the Columbus project from breaking ground. Derek had been 2 months away from having to go back to the lead investors and restructure the terms, which would have cost him an additional $400,000 in fees, and likely delayed the project by 6 months. I know this because I read the cash flow projections, the ones he sent me when he asked for the investment. I paused. He called me because he needed me. Not because he thought of me first. Because he had run out of other options. My father was looking at the documents now. He wasn't looking at Derek. I've been managing investment portfolios for 9 years, I said. My current book is just under $230 million. I have an industry track record that is, if anyone would like to review it, publicly available through my firm's disclosures. I pushed a second document toward the center of the table, a one-page summary my assistant had put together, straightforward numbers, no commentary. I'm not a footnote. I'm not a drifter. I'm not someone who showed up to take something that doesn't belong to her. I looked at my brother. I'm the person who, for some reason, kept showing up anyway. Even when I wasn't wanted at the table. Even when my calls weren't returned. Even when my father's text back was a thumbs up. I stopped. I hadn't planned to say that last part, and I felt the edge of something sharp inside it. But I kept my voice level. I invested in this project because I believed in it, and because I hoped, genuinely, that it would be the beginning of something different. And then I found the undisclosed encumbrance, and I realized that Derek was going to use my money to prop up a separate failing investment, and I decided I was done being taken advantage of by people who assumed I wasn't paying attention. Gerald Tran set down the cap table document. He looked at Derek. Were you aware of the borrowing against the project equity at the time you represented to Miss Whitfield that there were no undisclosed encumbrances? Derek's jaw moved. The situation with the hotel investment was. Yes or no, Derek, Gerald said. A very long silence. I was aware, Derek said, that there were some financial complexities. Then the representation was false, Gerald said. He said it without any particular emotion, the way you'd note that a window was open. He turned back to me. Miss Whitfield, I think I speak for the independent members of the board when I say that the cap table you've provided appears to be accurate, and that the conversion appears to have been valid. What is it that you're proposing? This was the part I had thought about the most. I had imagined this moment many different ways over the previous weeks. I had imagined coming in with a list of demands. I had imagined forcing Derek out entirely. I had imagined scenarios where I took operational control, where I installed new management, where I restructured the whole enterprise. In the end, what I wanted was simpler than any of that. I'm not here to take my brother's company, I said. I'm here to stop being erased from it. I proposed a governance restructuring. I would hold my 43% as a permanent equity stake, represented on the board by 2 independent directors of my choosing. Derek would remain CEO with full operational authority, because whatever else he was competent at the actual work of building things. Day-to-day decisions would remain with him. Major financial commitments above a certain threshold would require board approval, which meant, effectively, that he could not do again what he had done with the hotel venture use company assets, to prop up outside failures without disclosure. I also proposed that the hotel investment be wound down in an orderly way, the losses absorbed, and the remaining exposure disclosed to all shareholders by the end of the quarter. What I'm not willing to do, I said, is pretend this didn't happen. And I'm not willing to go back to being the person you call when you need something and ignore when you don't. The outside counsel for Derek asked for a recess. We took 20 minutes. Susan and I went to the small kitchen down the hall and she made coffee and said almost nothing, which is one of the things I appreciate most about her. When we went back in, Derek was at the window. He didn't turn around when we entered. His lead attorney spoke for him. They would not contest the cap table. They would agree to the governance restructuring in principle, subject to negotiation of specific thresholds. They would accept the wind down of the hotel exposure. Gerald Tran moved that the board acknowledge the corrected cap table as the official record. It passed 4-1. My father was the one, and even he looked less certain than I expected. After the vote, Derek finally turned from the window. He looked at me for a long moment. I couldn't read his face entirely. There was anger in it, and something else, something older and less comfortable. You should have just told me, he said. When you found the hotel thing, you should have come to me. I tried to come to you for 15 years, I said. You weren't interested. He didn't say anything after that. My father asked if he could speak with me privately before I left the building. We went to the small office that used to be his when he was still coming in every day. It smelled like coffee and old paper, and there was a photo on the desk from the groundbreaking of a warehouse project I vaguely remembered from childhood. My father in a hard hat, grinning, Derek at his side with a tiny shovel, doing his own version of the grin. I was not in the photo. I would have been about 4. Probably someone was holding me somewhere off to the side. I didn't know about the hotel thing, my father said. I want you to know that. I believe you, I said. And I did. I also didn't know. He stopped. He pressed his hands flat on the desk like he was trying to feel its solidity. 230 million. I didn't know. You didn't ask. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, a truck was backing into the loading dock of the building across the street. Someone was shouting instructions, the ordinary noise of things being built and moved. I should have, he said finally. That was all. He didn't elaborate. He didn't construct an apology from it or turn it into a longer explanation of himself. He just said that and looked at his hands. I stayed for a moment, and then I said, I'll be in touch with Susan about the board appointments. It shouldn't take more than a few weeks. Claire, He said it before I reached the door. Are you happy? Out there? I thought about my apartment over the lake. I thought about the work, the hours, the particular satisfaction of understanding how money moves through systems and finding the places where it could move better. I thought about the fact that I had built something significant entirely on my own, without anyone's help, without anyone's attention, without even anyone's awareness, and that I had done it well. Yes, I said. I am. He nodded. He looked like he was going to say something else, but he didn't. I took the elevator down alone. Susan was waiting in the lobby with both our coats, because it was February and she is always practical. We walked out into the cold Columbus air, and she handed me my coat, and she said, "That went about as well as it could have." "I know," I said. "Do you feel better?" I thought about it honestly. "I feel different," I said. "I think that's enough for now." We walked to the car. Behind us, the Whitfield development building stood the way it always had, solid, unremarkable, built to last. My father's name was on the sign above the entrance, not Mina, not Derek's. Someday, I thought, the sign might change. But that was a conversation for another time. What I knew, walking through the cold with my coat buttoned against the wind, was that I had spent 15 years becoming someone that no one in that building had thought to look for. I had been quiet when it would have been easy to be loud. I had been patient when it would have been satisfying to react. I had done the work, all of it, every day, in a city where no one knew my name or my family or the particular way I had been overlooked. And when the moment came, I hadn't needed to shout. I had just needed to open the folder,